Okay, so this is video 2 of your biomes. This is going to be the last video of your biomes. We're going to pick up where we left off with the tundra. So the tundra is your next biome. It's the coldest of all the biomes. That's the first one we watched on the video. And it's treeless, very low temperatures, very little precipitation. Some people make the argument that this is very similar to a desert. The main characteristic of this is that you have that permafrost all the time. So the ground, even in the summertime, once you get down a little bit deeper, is always frozen all year long. So you can't have anything with deep roots. Very little temperature change, moderate amounts of precipitation, not anything big. And then you see that tundra, it's across the subpolar region. So you see that up into the north. Temperature, very short growing season, very short summer, 2 months tops. The winter temperatures get really cold. The summer temperatures don't warm up very much. 54 is the highest, enough to sustain life, but not anywhere you'd want to go on vacation. Precipitation is medium amounts. Most of it's actually snow, so it's somewhere 6 to 10 inches, give or take. The soil is very slowly formed because it's frozen most of the time. So that permafrost, like I said, is one of the most important characteristics of this ecosystem. Even in the summertime, the surface will be thawed and will actually be usually saturated with water. So you have a lot of bogs and ponds in the summertime because of all the snow melt. But then even if you dig down even a couple feet, then you'll hit that permafrost to ground that is frozen all year long. So that allows, or that ensures that you can't have anything with deep root systems. You have to have vegetation that is relatively shallow, so trees are not going to be found up here in abundance. With that said, there are tons of plants in this. It's even with such a short growing season, very, very high biodiversity in terms of plants. A lot of flowering plants, plants that are adapted to carry out photosynthesis at low temperature and low light. But you see a lot of shrubs, you see a lot of grasses. You see, like I said, the flowering plants, and then the lichens and the moss and the ferns, stuff like that. Same thing, lots of flowers. So the animals are adapted to withstand pretty tough conditions as well, obviously. You have two kind of categories, the resident groups and the migratory groups. So the resident groups would be like birds and small mammals, up to the biggest ones are the muskox. They are adapted to the cold weather all the time, so they have really thick, compact bodies that will act as an insulator, not a lot of surface area, tend to have very thick fur feather cover and very high fat deposits, and are adapted to using the energy only when they absolutely need it. And then you see for the population adaptations, that cyclic fluctuation that's really common. So best example that I can give you is the hare and the fox. So you see the rabbit population doing that S-curve population cycle around the carrying capacity right here. And it's cycling because the fox population is right behind it. So as the rabbits go up, there's more foxes because the foxes have plenty of rabbits to eat. But then it hits a point where the foxes have eaten all the rabbits, so the rabbits decline. So then right after that, the foxes will decline. And then when the foxes decline, the rabbits will go back up, which will cause the foxes to go back up. And so it's this cyclic thing over and over and over again, where it's not really a stable population, but very dynamic populations that change pretty regularly. So the migratory species, a lot of birds. Birds are very common up here, and then you get some of the big grazers in the summer like caribou, moose, elk, reindeer in the tundra. Those are very, the big herds of those are going to be migrating and moving around, and will go down into the taiga during the winter time, or below that even. Okay, so forests. Forests are 1/3 of the Earth's land area, 2/3 of the leaf area, 70% of the carbon, so a pretty big impact on the Earth as a whole. Human impacts for forests is deforestation, pollution, and then industrial use of the plants, of the trees themselves. So there's a bunch of different types of forest biomes. We're going to look at each one, and it really boils down to seasonality being the most common way to classify. So we have a tropical forest, a temperate forest, and then the taiga, or the boreal forest. So the tropical forest, highest biodiversity. You guys all know what a rainforest looks like. High rainfall, lack of seasons, lots of daylight, rainy and dry season, I mean. You guys are all familiar with rainforests. So the biggest thing here when you're looking at these graphs is you look at and you see there's no change in temperature, pretty much. You see that rainy versus dry season, but the temperature stays pretty much the same. And then you see the rainforest down around the tropics. Temperature stays the same. I don't know how many times they want me to say it. Precipitation is pretty high, rains almost every day, and then during the rainy season it will rain more than once a day. So up to or over 2 meters, so it's a little over 6 feet of rainfall in a year. Tends to be actually nutrient poor soil and high decomposition. It's so hot and humid that you get a lot of decomposition going on, and then all the rainfall tends to wash away and leach out of the soil all of the nutrients. So the plant life is very different. We talked when we watched the video about the concept that there's that canopy, substory, and forest floor, and so we're going to see different plants in each one. Highly diverse in all kinds. We get a lot of the medical plants from here. So you see a lot of different, really unusual stuff, which is really cool. The adaptations in a rainforest to a rainforest plant is that if you're on the forest floor, they're tolerating constant shade. They're adapting, strategies to reach the sunlight. There's a lot of fungi, which is not a plant, but a lot of fungi on the forest floor to take care of that high rate of decomposition. And then the animals, again, highest biodiversity. You're going to see different animals in different places. Tends to be not so much of your big animals, but tends to be medium size and then down. So lots of insects, lots of invertebrates, lots of small animals, small mammals, and then your biggest predators are probably going to be your jaguar or your snakes. So you have a food chain example there, and notice that they differentiate between the different layers. Okay, so temperate forest is colder, has well-defined seasons, has a winter, moderate climate, shorter growing season than a tropical forest, about half the year, and then a much bigger temperature range. So you see that big temperature range right there is very characteristic of the temperate forest. And we see temperate forests in a few places, obviously a little bit colder climate, farther away from the equator, and then they really kind of just tend to be in pockets. So the precipitation, distributed evenly throughout the year. We don't have a rainy versus dry season in these types of ecosystems, but the soils are very fertile, lots and lots of nutrient with lots of decaying matter to replace it. And then the plants, again, you have that canopy versus forest floor concept, not as dense as a rainforest, but still relatively dense. Much more light penetration down to the forest floor in a temperate rainforest or a temperate forest. You tend to have in each separate area specific, 4 or 5 tree species, and then all of the shrub and stuff species, but the biodiversity is not as high. So these are some of the trees you can see, and then animals for the temperate forest, food web for the temperate forest. You can actually further divide temperate forests based on where in the world you are, seasonal distribution, looking at the rainfall. So you can look at the evergreen forests, conifer forests, Mediterranean, a couple different types of coniferous, and then the temperate rainforest. Those are really, really cool. Like Alaska has rainforest in it because there's so much rainfall. So very, very interesting there if you start to look at those sub-populations. I would just be familiar that these exist. I don't know that you necessarily need to know the different types, but know that there are different types of temperate forests. Be able to recognize it on a test question. Okay, boreal forests, or the taiga. It's the largest terrestrial biome. It's 50 to 60 degrees north latitudes. It's just almost subpolar. Very short, moist, moderately warm summers with really long, cold, and dry winters. And you've got a summer that lasts maybe 3 to 4 months. Okay, so you see your temperature and your precipitation changes. So you see that big temperature change. And then you see them up, north of our temperate forest. So you see our temperate forest down here, down here, down here, and you see your boreal forest or your taiga up here. Okay. We get a lot of snow, so most of the precipitation is in the form of snow, still thin and nutrient-poor soil. The canopy is low light penetration, so limited understory. The trees are commonly coniferous or evergreen trees. So you're seeing the leaf pattern that's a needle pattern as opposed to a broadleaf pattern. So that's the big difference between the taiga and the temperate forest, is the shape of the leaves on the trees. And then you see the different options there for trees, so just some of the examples. And the animals, you do get some of the big predator animals. Remember, you're getting the migrating herds through this ecosystem, and then some of the ones all year round are the otter and the fox, the hare, all that kind of thing. And your ecosystem there, so remember they're including these grazing animals because they're coming in and having a significant impact on this environment.